And so I want to just give a nod to the Honorable Paul Hellyer, because if we had 10 leaders in the world,
He's the only one.
Be done. 10 leaders. And I have to say, it would only take 10 people of what his stature as a former Minister of Defense coming together who are in power to do the right thing on behalf of humanity. So, thank you.
I'd just like to say a couple of things. First of all, I'm humbled, flabbergasted, and of course, very honored at this award, and especially in the presence of the person who is responsible for getting me into it, and I will be very careful. I told my wife when I was getting my wife, we were getting married a week after Victor got me to make that speech. And I told her, oh, there would only be a one-off. I did not mean to lie to her. But then along comes information like you wouldn't believe. And my first mentor and my first ufologist teacher is right here beside me. And we sat down on the dock here in Toronto. And Dr. Gere, who I now call by his first name, I think he's okay with that, gave me a 3-hour briefing. And Steve, I still remember some of it.
Okay, Matt, you can hook up that.
And probably before, we have had breakthroughs in technology, which I rather kindly call the gangbangsters, and cartels of various types, oil, what have you, have kept away from the public. Most people don't know that in the 1920s, T. Townsend Brown was doing experiments with high voltage systems where you could have a crystalline structure and with the correct electronic signal going into it, have that object levitate. Sounds familiar? Like a UFO? 1920s. This was reproduced in Germany in the Koloski-Frost experiment in late 1920s, 28, 29. Of course, T. Townsend Brown's work was subsumed by covert programs eventually, and the RAND Corporation. And what we are looking at today is a civilization on Earth that is dying because it has been strangled to death. And we are 100 years of lost evolution and of lost development as a people. And this is our chance to get it back. Now, a lot of people say, why did you do this film unacknowledged? Which, by the way, those of you who contributed to that, it was crowdfunded, raise your hand. Everybody give an applause for it. That's how we made it. Okay, so that documentary, which some people go, well, you know, you didn't go far enough in it. I said, this documentary wasn't made for you all. It was made for 7.2 billion people out there who don't know anything about this, okay? So if you're gonna be compassionate, you can't stay in your bubble. You need to go out of your bubble and you need to reach out to the rest of the world. Now, we're very fortunate that we have a major distributor for that film, The Orchard, and that is now, I think we're 8 weeks on being #1 on iTunes worldwide. I think Richard Gere was miffed when his new movie came out and we beat them. No relationship, he's Gere, I'm Greer. So So
Have you seen Richard?
what is really important about unacknowledged is that, and I'm going to
It's a
just
beautiful drawing.
encapsulate it. You're going to see it tonight, and then we're going to have a Q&A
Very, very well
after.
acted. I highly recommend it.
After the film is shown. It's
Not a
really an
pleasant
attempt to
story,
put
but it's a very
together
relevant story.
a taste of the evidence that's compelling, all from government sources, military witnesses, government witnesses, documents, etc. But then go beyond the, let's call it the ephemera, the sort of phenomenon of passing events and evidence. You know, after you have what, 500,000 or 1 million cases that are in the UFO reporting system, we have enough evidence. What's the secrecy about? But more importantly, how could they do this? How is it structured? And the name of the film comes from the first word that I learned of a special project category in the early 1990s, and this was just before I was briefing the director of the CIA. And unlike Paul Hellyer, he went on to not only defame me, but deny the meeting took place. And he took a golden parachute out of the directorate of the CIA onto the chief counsel for Booz Allen Hamilton, the contractor that Snowden worked for the NSA. And of course, he knew what side that his bread was buttered on and did not want it to be known when I initially, after he was out of office, disclosed the nature of that meeting. But that's a side parentheses. If we had every one of, as I said before, of the integrity of Paul Hellyer, we wouldn't be in the world we have today. Haven't shared this in any real detail yet, but I think I should. And about 6 months ago, I had a 7-hour meeting with the son of Senator John Warner, who I had fingered as a member of this cabal many years ago. And Senator John Warner, who was not Mark Warner currently of Virginia, he's the Senator John Warner of Virginia who's retired. He had been an undersecretary of the Navy and had been very connected to these classified projects from early on in his life. He married Paul Mellon's daughter. Now the Mellon family, Paul Mellon, around the time, one of the few billionaires in the world at that time, went over in 1945 to Germany with General George S. Patton and some others to retrieve a partially functioning Nazi anti-gravity system that they were working on. And that was their secret weapon that they were going to win the war with. But they didn't get it perfected before we got the atomic bomb. And the rest, as they say, is history. However, an interesting side note to this, now I learned this, that Senator Warner's son, who's about my age now, a little bit younger, said to me, you know, Dr. Gere, I have to admit that my family are fascists. He just flat out said it completely. And he is not. But he said that he's come to realize that this is very much the case, and the people that they have worked with are also fascists. They are not interested in a democratic society and an open and free society. So what happened at this point is, believe it or not, as hard-ass as General George S. Patton was, he wanted this technology developed quickly and released to the public because he saw the humanitarian value of it. Free energy, no surface roads, no pollution, etc. and so on. They killed George S. Patton. He was assassinated. And this is known by the Mellon family. Now, because of this, what happened, and this is 45 before Roswell, a chill went through what I call the white hats in the military industrial complex. Because not all of them, you can't paint all of them with the same broad stroke. There were many of them who wanted this to come out and were stopped. And the ones who wanted to maintain the status quo, predictably, are the ones who benefit from the status quo of endless war and the centralized gangbangster system. Now, these folks worked hand in glove with large banking cartels and oil cartels David Rockefeller was mentioned earlier. And yet there were people in those families who were trying to defect. For example, Lawrence Rockefeller, an early supporter of disclosure and the man who set up the briefings for Bill and Hillary Clinton and the materials we put together in the 90s, he was opposed to this secrecy. He wanted to make open, peaceful contact with these civilizations, and he knew we were in trouble. And so Lawrence Rockefeller, however, could only go so far. You know, I recount this story, let's stay way back here. I recount this story of being at the Rockefeller Ranch, and I'm out there and late at night and he's in his 80s, mid 80s, and he says to me, well, we need someone to head this up. I'm a doctor working full-time in an ER. I mean, we're working, you know, my short shifts were 15 hours, our long ones were 27. And I had 4 little children, and I had, you know, I said, what, this is ridiculous. And I said, Lawrence, you're old and you're rich and you're a Rockefeller. Why don't you do it? He said, oh no. He said, my family are already jumping up and down on my, I'm gonna say what he said, toes, because I'm even hosting this meeting. And I said, well, why is that? He says, they don't want this to come out, the other part of this clan. So this is, you know, people make these simplistic but sort of conspiracy cases, the craziest things I've ever seen. You can't be near the podium without it. And we were talking about this, and I said, well, to what extent has this been known in your family? And did you get confirmation directly? He says, yes. Paul Mellon, as he got older, had a few too many drinks once and spilled the guts, the beans, all of it, to Senator Warner's son, and confirmed that in fact we had technologies we'd gotten from the Nazis and had been studying, and that those were actually under development. But along with those technology are the things like this disintegrator weapon that Mr. Hellyer referred to, that are scalar electromagnetic systems. Those are not new. Those were developed in the early part of the 20th century. And those were weaponized so that when these ET craft were checking out what these murderous monkeys known as humans were doing near Roswell, they switched it on, bang, 3 of them crashed. 2 were retrieved very quickly. The 3rd one wasn't found until 1951 or 52. So and people think, well, many people in the media said, well, you know, what would interstellar civilizations not be able to fly in our atmosphere? They were flying in our atmosphere and then were being surprise targeted with scalar or longitudinal electromagnetic weapons that were early iterations of what we have today.